Seattle afternoon hung heavy with gray clouds, a persistent drizzle painting the towering glass buildings in muted tones. Inside the marble-clad lobby of First National Bank, the atmosphere buzzed with the quiet tension of Monday afternoon banking rush. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the polished floor, where a long line of customers waited with varying degrees of patience. Robert Martinez, 68, stood motionless in the queue, his weathered hands clasped around a worn leather briefcase that had seen better decades. His gray wool coat, though clean and pressed, bore the telltale signs of a man living on a teacher's pension. But his eyes, sharp, calculating, intensely observant, told a different story. They tracked every movement, every gesture, every word of the man standing directly in front of him. David Thompson, 48, commanded attention even in a crowded bank lobby. His $3,000 Armani suit fit him like a second skin, the Italian leather shoes gleamed despite the Seattle drizzle, and the Rolex Submariner on his wrist caught the light with each animated gesture. He was deep in conversation on his iPhone, his voice carrying the unmistakable confidence of a man who had clawed his way to the top. "That's right, Marcus," David spoke into his phone, his tone sharp and authoritative. "The $50 million acquisition will be finalized this Friday. I've been positioning Thompson Industries for this moment for 5 years. This deal will triple our market share in the Pacific Northwest." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, then laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. No delays. I don't care if their legal team needs more time. Time is money, and I don't have patience for people who can't keep up with the pace of real business. David glanced at his Rolex with visible irritation, then turned slightly, his gaze falling on the elderly man behind him. Robert Martinez looked exactly like what David expected from someone of his generation. Outdated, slow, irrelevant to the modern world of high-stakes commerce. "You know what frustrates me most about this city?" David continued his phone conversation, his voice deliberately loud enough for others to hear. "These banks still operate like it's 1985. They let these senior citizens clog up the system during peak business hours. Don't they have all day to handle their little pension deposits and Social Security checks? Some of us are running actual companies here." An elderly woman 2 spots ahead turned around with a disapproving look, but David was oblivious, lost in his own sense of importance. Robert Martinez heard every word, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. But beneath the calm exterior, memories were stirring, memories of a scrawny 17-year-old boy named David Thompson who sat in the back row of room 237 at Lincoln High School in 1995. A boy whose father had abandoned the family, whose mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, whose anger at the world manifested in disrupted classes and failing grades. What David didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that this encounter was no coincidence. For 30 years, Robert Martinez had been watching, waiting, planning. The worn briefcase in his hands contained documents that could either elevate David Thompson to unimaginable heights or destroy everything he had built. Today was Judgment Day, and David was about to take the most important test of his life without even knowing it. In the inner pocket of his coat, Robert's fingers traced the edge of a thick manila envelope. Inside were legal documents, bank transfers, and contracts that represented the culmination of 3 decades of careful orchestration. Every lucky break in David's career, every coincidental business opportunity, every moment when success seemed to fall into his lap, none of it had been chance. Robert Martinez had been pulling the strings from the shadows, guiding his former student's path with the patience of a master chess player. But now the final move was at hand. The question that would determine everything was simple. Had David Thompson learned the lessons that truly mattered? Or had success corrupted the boy Robert had once believed in? The bank teller called next, and the line shuffled forward. David pocketed his phone and stepped toward the counter, completely unaware that his former teacher stood just 3 feet behind him, holding the power to change both their lives forever. The test was about to begin. David approached the marble counter with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. The bank teller, a young woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a professional smile, greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" "I need to process a wire transfer for $50 million, David announced, his voice carrying across the quiet bank lobby. He placed his platinum banking card on the counter with a flourish. "This needs to be completed by 4 p.m. today. I assume that won't be a problem for someone of your capabilities. Sarah's smile faltered slightly at the condescending tone, but she maintained her professionalism. Of course, sir. I'll just need to verify some information in it. Look, David interrupted, glancing at his watch again. I don't have time for the standard bureaucratic nonsense. I'm David Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries. This bank has handled my business for 15 years. Surely you can expedite this for a valued client. Behind him, Robert Martinez observed every interaction with the intensity of a scientist studying a crucial experiment. This was exactly what he had hoped to witness and feared to confirm. The wire transfer process began, but the bank's computer system suddenly slowed to a crawl. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, her brow furrowed with concentration and growing anxiety. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson. Our system seems to be experiencing some delays today. It might take an additional 15 to 20 minutes to process a transaction of this size. David's face flushed red. 20 minutes? Do you have any idea what 20 minutes costs me? I have a conference call with investors in Tokyo in exactly 30 minutes. This is completely unacceptable. His voice rose, drawing stares from other customers. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she continued typing, clearly flustered by the public humiliation. Sir, I understand your frustration, but these security protocols are in place for. Don't lecture me about security protocols. David slammed his hand on the counter, causing Sarah to jump. I want to speak to your manager immediately. This level of incompetence is exactly why traditional banking is dying. You people can't keep up with the demands of real business. What David didn't know was that Robert Martinez had anticipated this moment perfectly. 3 months ago, Robert had made a substantial donation to the bank's Employee Assistance Fund, specifically requesting that it be used to help tellers deal with difficult customers. He had also arranged for today's computer delays through a contact in the bank's IT department. Every second of David's reaction was being carefully observed and mentally catalogued. An elderly man in line behind Robert, a genuine customer with no connection to this elaborate test, cleared his throat nervously. Excuse me, young man, he said to David, but there's no need to take your frustration out on this nice young lady. We're all waiting patiently. David whirled around, his eyes blazing with indignation. Mind your own business, old man. This is between me and the bank. Maybe if you and the rest of the senior citizen brigade didn't clog up the system with your penny-ante transactions, the rest of us could conduct real business efficiently. The elderly man stepped back, clearly hurt and intimidated. Other customers began murmuring disapprovingly, but David was too consumed with his own importance to notice the shifting mood in the room. Robert Martinez felt his heart sink. This was not the David Thompson he had hoped to find. This was not the scared, vulnerable teenager he had spent countless hours mentoring after school. This was a man who had let success poison his soul, who had forgotten where he came from and who had helped him get there. But the test wasn't over yet. Sarah, near tears but still trying to maintain her composure, looked up from her computer screen. Mr. Thompson, I have some good news. The system is responding now, but I need to inform you that a transaction of this size requires additional verification. We'll need to contact your account's primary guarantor to confirm the transfer. David's confident expression suddenly shifted to confusion, then concern. Primary guarantor? What are you talking about? I'm the sole owner of Thompson Industries. There is no guarantor. Sarah's fingers clicked across her keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen with growing puzzlement. According to our records, sir, there is indeed a primary guarantor listed on your corporate account. The name shows as RM Holdings, LLC. They've been listed as the account guarantor since 2008. The color drained from David's face. That's impossible. I've never heard of RM Holdings. There must be some mistake in your system. Behind him, Robert Martinez stepped forward slightly, his weathered hand reaching into his coat pocket to touch the manila envelope that contained the truth David was about to discover. The real test was just beginning. Sarah's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the account details, her confusion evident. Mr. Thompson, according to our records, RM Holdings has been the silent guarantor for all major transactions on your corporate account for the past 17 years. They've backed every significant loan, every major investment, every expansion of Thompson Industries. David's world began to tilt. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. That's impossible. I built my company from nothing. Every dollar, every deal, every success I earned it myself. There is no silent partner. There is no guarantor. But even as he spoke the words, fragments of memory began surfacing. The mysteriously approved loan for his first office space when his credit was terrible. The coincidental introduction to his biggest client at a coffee shop. The investor who had appeared out of nowhere during his company's darkest hour in 2015, offering exactly the amount he needed to survive. Sir, Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper, R.M. Holdings isn't just a guarantor. According to this, they own 51% of Thompson Industries. You're listed as the managing partner, but not the majority owner. The manila folder in David's hand containing the documents for his $50 million acquisition suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His legs felt weak. The confident, commanding presence he had projected just minutes earlier crumbled like a house of cards. I need to see those records, David demanded, but his voice cracked. Print everything. Every transaction. Every guarantee, every document related to RM Holdings. Now. Behind him, Robert Martinez watched the man he had once mentored fall apart in real time. 30 years of careful orchestration. 30 years of protecting David from the shadows. 30 years of hoping that success wouldn't corrupt the good heart he had once seen in that troubled teenager. The elderly man whom David had insulted earlier stepped forward tentatively. Son, he said gently, maybe you should sit down. You look pale. Don't call me son. David snapped. But the fire had gone out of his voice. He was a man drowning in the realization that his entire life might be built on a foundation he didn't understand. Sarah printed page after page of documents, her eyes widening as she read. Mr. Thompson, there's something else. RM Holdings has been making substantial charitable donations in your name for years. The David Thompson Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Students, the Thompson Family Crisis Center, the annual Thompson Industries Community Outreach Program. According to this, over $20 million has been donated to various causes, all funded by RM Holdings but credited to you publicly. David's knees buckled. He gripped the marble counter for support. Every award he had received for philanthropy, every recognition for community service, every moment of public praise for his generosity, none of it had been his doing. Who is RM Holdings? He whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. Who has been controlling my life? Robert Martinez stepped forward, his movement deliberate and measured. The moment he had been preparing for over 3 decades had finally arrived. He reached into his coat and withdrew the manila envelope, its contents representing the culmination of the most elaborate and patient act of mentorship in history. David, Robert said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos of the young man's confusion like a blade through silk. David spun around, his eyes wild with panic and confusion. For a moment, he stared at the elderly man he had dismissed and insulted just minutes earlier. The face was older, lined with age and wisdom, but the eyes were exactly the same as they had been 30 years ago in room 237 at Lincoln High School. Mr. Martinez? David's voice was barely a whisper, the recognition hitting him like a physical blow. But why are you? Robert Martinez smiled sadly, the weight of 3 decades of secrets visible in his weathered features. Hello? David, I think it's time we had a conversation about your education. The real education. The one that's been happening for the last 30 years. He held up the manila envelope. RM Holdings stands for Robert Martinez Holdings. And son, we need to talk about what you've learned and what you haven't. The bank lobby fell silent except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Seattle rain against the windows. Every customer, every teller, every security guard seemed to sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A moment when the carefully constructed reality of one man's life was about to be completely rewritten. David Thompson, CEO and self-made millionaire, stared at his high school teacher and realized that everything he thought he knew about himself was about to change forever. The silence in the bank lobby stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap at any moment. David Thompson stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality before him. His high school teacher, the man he had dismissed as just another elderly inconvenience, held the keys to everything he thought he had built. Robert Martinez gestured toward a quiet seating area near the bank's windows. Shall we sit down, David? This conversation is 30 years overdue. David's legs moved mechanically, his body operating on autopilot while his mind reeled. They settled into leather chairs facing each other, the manila envelope resting between them like a bridge between past and present. "I don't understand," David began, his voice hollow. "How is this possible? I built Thompson Industries myself. I worked 18-hour days, I made the deals, I took the risks." Robert leaned forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. "You did work those 18-hour days, David. You did make those deals. But you never worked alone. Even when you thought you did." He opened the envelope and withdrew a thick stack of documents. "Do you remember your first day of senior year? September 15th, 1994. You walked into my classroom angry at the world, convinced that life had dealt you an unfair hand." David's throat tightened. He remembered that day vividly. His father had left the week before. His mother was working 3 jobs just to keep their apartment, and he was certain his future held nothing but disappointment. "You told me that education was pointless for someone like you," Robert continued. "You said rich kids got opportunities and poor kids got lectures about working hard. You were 17 years old and already convinced the game was rigged." Robert pulled out a photograph. David at 17, sullen and defiant, sitting in the back row of the classroom. "I made you a promise that day, remember? I told you that if you were willing to learn, really learn, I would make sure you had every opportunity that any rich kid ever had." The memory hit David like a physical blow. He had laughed at his teacher that day, called him naive, said teachers didn't understand the real world. But Mr. Martinez had simply smiled and said, "We'll see about that." "The college scholarship," David whispered, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. "The one that came out of nowhere when I couldn't afford tuition. The Robert Martinez Educational Foundation." Robert confirmed. "Established in 1995 with my entire inheritance from my father's estate. You were the first recipient, but not the last. Over the years, it's helped send 847 students to college." David's hands shook as he reached for the documents. Page after page revealed a pattern of intervention so subtle, so carefully orchestrated, that he had never suspected. The business loan that had been mysteriously approved despite his poor credit history. The chance meeting with his first major client at a Starbucks. The investor who had appeared during his company's financial crisis in 2015. "Every single one," Robert said quietly. "Every opportunity, every lucky break. Every moment when success seemed to fall into your lap, I was there, working behind the scenes. Not to make things easy for you, but to ensure you had the same chances as someone born into privilege." David looked up from the documents, his eyes filled with tears he couldn't control. "But why? Why would you do this? The money, the time, the effort. Why would you sacrifice so much for one student?" Robert's smile was gentle, paternal. "Because I saw something in you, David. Beneath all that anger and defiance, I saw a brilliant mind and a good heart. I saw a young man who could change the world if given the chance. I believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. But I failed you," David choked out. "Look at how I treated that teller, how I spoke to that elderly man. Look at how I treated you just minutes ago. I became everything I once hated, arrogant, dismissive. Cruel to people I thought were beneath me." Robert reached across and placed his weathered hand on David's shoulder. "That's why we're here today, son. This was never just about giving you opportunities. It was about seeing what you would do with them. Success reveals character, David. It doesn't create it, it reveals it." He pulled out another document, this one bearing official legal seals. 3 months ago, I made a decision. I'm 68 years old and I won't be here forever. It's time to transfer full ownership of our holdings and therefore Thompson Industries to its rightful owner. But first, I needed to know who that owner had become. David stared at the transfer documents, his name clearly visible as the recipient. "You're giving me everything? Even after how I acted today?" "That depends," Robert said, his voice taking on the familiar tone of a teacher presenting a final exam. "On what you do next. You see, David, this was never about money or business success. This was about whether the scared, angry boy I once knew had grown into a man worthy of the opportunities he'd been given." He stood up, leaving the documents on the table between them. "You have a choice to make." You can take these papers, become the sole owner of a $50 million empire, and continue living as the man I saw in this bank today. Or, Robert paused, his eyes holding David's with an intensity that transported them both back to that classroom 30 years ago. Or you can remember who you really are and who you were meant to become. The weight of 30 years of hidden mentorship, sacrifice, and unconditional faith settled on David's shoulders. In that moment, he realized that his real education was just beginning. David Thompson sat in stunned silence, the legal documents spread before him like a map to a future he had never imagined possible. The transfer papers bore his name in elegant script, ready to make him the sole owner of an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. All he had to do was sign. But Robert Martinez wasn't finished. "Before you make your decision," Robert said, settling back into his chair, "there's something else you need to know. Something that will help you understand the true scope of what's at stake here." He reached into the envelope one final time and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "I've kept detailed records of every student I've helped over the past 30 years. Not just you, David. You were the first, but you weren't the last." David's eyes widened as Robert opened the journal, revealing page after page of names, photographs, and detailed notes. Each entry told a story: a struggling student, a family in crisis, a young person who needed just one person to believe in them. "Maria Gonzalez, class of 1998, Robert read aloud. "Single mother at 17, everyone said she'd never graduate. She's now Dr. Gonzalez, chief of pediatric surgery at Seattle Children's Hospital. The scholarship that got her through medical school? Funded by Thompson Industries' early profits." He turned the page. "James Chun, class of 2003. Homeless for most of his senior year, sleeping in the school library. He's now a software engineer at Microsoft. The coding bootcamp that changed his life? Sponsored by an anonymous donor who happened to be very interested in his success." Page after page revealed the same pattern. Robert had used David's success that David now knew had been carefully orchestrated, to create opportunities for hundreds of other students. Every profit from Thompson Industries had been quietly funneled into scholarships, mentorship programs, and crisis intervention funds. "You see, David," Robert continued, his voice heavy with emotion, "you were never just my student. You were my partner in something much larger than either of us. Every dollar you earned, every deal you closed, every success you achieved, it all went toward lifting up the next generation of kids who reminded me of you at 17. David's hands trembled as he reached for the journal, scanning the endless list of lives that had been changed. "All of these people, they all think they succeeded on their own, don't they?" "Just like you did," Robert confirmed. "And that's exactly how it should be. True mentorship isn't about taking credit, it's about giving others the confidence to believe in themselves." Suddenly, David understood the full weight of what Robert was offering him. This wasn't just about inheriting a company or becoming wealthy. This was about inheriting a legacy of service. A responsibility to continue the work that had been happening in his name for decades. "But there's a condition," Robert said, his teacher's instincts kicking in for what might be the last time. "If you choose to accept full ownership of Thompson Industries and RM Holdings, you must also accept the responsibility that comes with it. The company's primary mission will remain unchanged, to create opportunities for those who need them most." He pulled out a final document, this one bearing the seal of a legal trust. 80% of all future profits must continue to fund educational and social programs. You'll be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams, David, but you'll also be accountable to something greater than yourself. David looked up from the papers, his eyes meeting his teacher's. "And if I refuse? If I walk away from all of this?" Robert's smile was sad but understanding. "Then everything goes to the foundation, and you continue running Thompson Industries as you have been, as a managing partner with a comfortable salary. But not as an owner. The work continues, just without you at the helm." The bank lobby around them seemed to fade away as David grappled with the magnitude of the choice before him. He thought about the teller he had humiliated, the elderly man he had dismissed, the arrogant words that had poured from his mouth just an hour earlier. Then he thought about the 17-year-old boy who had walked into room 237 convinced that the world was against him, and the teacher who had spent 30 years proving him wrong. "There's something I need to do first," David said quietly, standing up from his chair. He walked back to the teller window where Sarah was still working, her eyes red from the stress of their earlier encounter. The other customers watched curiously as the man who had caused such a scene approached the young woman he had berated. "Sarah," David said, his voice completely different from the commanding tone he had used earlier. "I owe you an apology. A sincere, heartfelt apology. There is no excuse for how I treated you today. You were doing your job professionally and courteously, and I was being the worst version of myself." Sarah looked up, surprised by the genuine remorse in his voice. "Mr. Thompson, it's okay. I understand you were under pressure." "No," David interrupted gently. "It's not okay, and pressure is no excuse for treating another human being with disrespect. You deserve better than that. Everyone deserves better than that." He turned to address the elderly man he had insulted earlier, who was still waiting patiently in line. "Sir, I owe you an apology as well. You were right to call me out for my behavior. Thank you for having the courage to stand up for what was right, even when I was too arrogant to listen." The elderly man's face softened. "Apology accepted, young man. We all have bad days." "This wasn't a bad day," David replied. "This was a bad version of who I had become. But I'm hoping to change that." He returned to where Robert was waiting, the documents still spread across the small table. The entire bank lobby was watching now, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. David picked up the pen that would transfer ownership of everything to him. But before he signed, he looked one more time at his teacher, the man who had believed in him when no one else would, who had sacrificed his own wealth and comfort to give an angry teenager a chance at a better life. "Mr. Martinez," David said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby, "I have one question before I sign these papers." Robert nodded, waiting. "Will you stay on as chairman of the board? Because I think I still have a lot to learn, and I can't think of anyone better to teach me." For the first time in 30 years, Robert Martinez allowed tears to flow freely down his weathered cheeks. "I thought you'd never ask." David signed the papers with a steady hand. But he knew that the real work, the work of becoming the man his teacher had always believed he could be, was just beginning. 1 year later, the same First National Bank lobby buzzed with activity on a Tuesday afternoon. But this time, the atmosphere was different, warmer, more purposeful. A large banner hung across the main entrance. Thompson Martinez Foundation Annual Scholarship Awards Ceremony. David Thompson, now 49, stood at a podium addressing a crowd of students, parents, teachers, and community leaders. His expensive suit had been replaced with a simple navy blazer, and the arrogant confidence that once defined him had evolved into something deeper, genuine humility mixed with passionate purpose. "When I was 17 years old," David began, his voice carrying easily across the packed lobby, "I walked into a classroom convinced that success was reserved for people who weren't like me. I was angry, bitter, and certain that the deck was stacked against kids from broken homes and empty bank accounts." In the front row, Robert Martinez sat with tears of pride glistening in his eyes. At 69, he looked healthier and more vibrant than he had in years, energized by watching his life's work flourish in ways he had never imagined. "I was wrong about a lot of things back then," David continued, "but I was especially wrong about one thing. I thought I would have to succeed alone. What I didn't know was that a teacher named Robert Martinez had already decided that no student in his classroom would ever have to face the world without support." The audience turned to look at Robert, who waved modestly from his seat. Sarah, the bank teller from that fateful day, sat nearby with her family. She had since been promoted to branch manager and was one of the foundation's board members. "Today, we're here to announce the recipients of this year's Thompson Martinez Foundation scholarships," David said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But before we do, I want to share what we've accomplished together in just 1 year." A large screen descended behind him, displaying statistics that made the audience gasp. 247 full college scholarships awarded, 89 trade school programs funded, 156 families helped through crisis intervention, 34 small businesses launched through microloans, 12 new community centers opened. In underserved neighborhoods, these numbers represent more than statistics, David explained. They represent lives changed, dreams realized, and potential unleashed. Each one of these achievements exists because a teacher refused to give up on an angry teenager 30 years ago. He paused, looking directly at Robert. "Mr. Martinez taught me that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, It's measured by what you give away. It's not about how high you climb, but how many people you lift up along the way. The first scholarship recipient was called to the stage, Maria Santos, a 17-year-old from the same neighborhood where David had grown up. As she accepted her award, David saw himself at that age. Scared, hopeful, and desperately in need of someone to believe in her potential. "Maria," David said as he handed her the scholarship certificate, "I want you to remember something. This scholarship isn't charity, it's an investment. We're investing in you because we believe you have something important to contribute to the world. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." As the ceremony continued, more students took the stage. Each one carried a story of struggle and determination that reminded David of his own journey. But unlike his experience, these students would know from the beginning that they weren't alone. After the last award was presented, David returned to the podium for closing remarks. "Before we end today's ceremony, I want to address something that happened in this very lobby 1 year ago. Some of you may have heard the story, but I think it's important to tell it again." He looked out at the audience, his gaze settling on the elderly man he had insulted that day, who had become a regular volunteer at the Foundation's community outreach programs. "A year ago, I stood in this bank as a different person. I was successful by conventional measures, but I had forgotten the most important lessons of my life. I was rude to a bank teller who was simply doing her job. I was dismissive to an elderly gentleman who was trying to help. I was, in short, everything I had once promised myself I would never become." The lobby was completely silent now, every person hanging on his words. But sometimes life gives us exactly the teacher we need at exactly the moment we need them. My teacher had been watching over me for 30 years, waiting for the right moment to remind me who I really was. That day in this lobby, he gave me a choice. I could continue being the person I had become, or I could remember the person I was meant to be. David's voice grew thick with emotion. The beautiful thing about second chances is that they're never just about you. When you choose to become better, you create ripple effects that touch lives you may never even know about. He gestured toward the scholarship recipients. These young people represent those ripple effects. Every choice we make to lift someone up, to believe in someone's potential, to invest in someone's future, it multiplies exponentially. Maria Santos might become a doctor who saves lives. James Rodriguez might become an engineer who designs sustainable cities. Angela Kim might become a teacher who changes the trajectory of hundreds of students' lives. Robert Martinez stood up slowly, his weathered hands gripping his cane. The audience turned to watch as the elderly teacher made his way to the podium. David stepped aside, offering the microphone to the man who had made it all possible. 43 years ago, Robert began, his voice still strong despite his age. "I became a teacher because I believed that education could change the world. Today I know it can. But not because of what happens in classrooms, because of what happens when we refuse to give up on each other." He looked out at the scholarship recipients. "You young people are not just receiving an education today. You're inheriting a responsibility. Someday when you've achieved your dreams, remember that success is not a destination. It's a launching pad for lifting others up." Robert turned to David, his eyes shining with pride. "And to my former student, who became my partner, who became my friend, thank you for proving that the best lessons are the ones we teach each other." The ceremony ended with thunderous applause, but the real celebration was quieter, more personal. As the crowd dispersed, David and Robert stood together in the spot where their confrontation had taken place exactly 1 year earlier. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had failed your test that day?" David asked. Robert smiled, the same gentle expression he had worn in room 237 all those years ago. "There was no way you could fail, David. I knew the real you was still in there somewhere. Sometimes we just need the right circumstances to remember who we really are. And if I hadn't remembered, then I would have kept trying," Robert replied simply. "That's what teachers do. We never give up on our students, even when they've given up on themselves." As they walked toward the exit together, David noticed a young man sitting alone in one of the lobby chairs. He was about 17, wearing clothes that had seen better days, and had the same angry, defensive expression that David remembered seeing in mirrors at that age. "Excuse me," David said, approaching the young man. "Are you here for the scholarship ceremony?" The teenager looked up suspiciously. "Yeah, but I think I'm too late. I got lost trying to find this place." David smiled and extended his hand. I'm David Thompson, and you're exactly on time. In fact, I think there's someone I'd like you to meet. He gestured toward Robert, who was already walking over with that familiar teacher's instinct for recognizing a student in need. This is Mr. Martinez, David said. He's the best teacher I ever had, and I have a feeling he's about to become yours too. As Robert began talking with the young man, David realized that the cycle was beginning again. Somewhere in Seattle, another angry teenager was about to discover that he didn't have to face the world alone. The legacy would continue, one student at a time, one life at a time, one generation at a time. And in room 237 at Lincoln High School, where it all began, a small plaque now hung beside the door, in memory of the belief that every student has unlimited potential, and in honor of those who refuse to give up on that belief. The greatest lesson David had learned wasn't about success or failure. It was about the courage to believe in someone else's potential even when they couldn't see it themselves. Especially then. The end.